What are the exceptions related with multithreading applications? Exceptions in Java can be classified as checked and unchecked exceptions. Compiler forced to take actions either by handling by try-catch or recommend to list them to the caller in method's throw clause. In contrast, unchecked exception occurs anywhere in the program, such as out-of-memory condition. Checked exceptions are known as compile time exception, whereas unchecked exception, also known as runtime exceptions. Checked exceptions are propagated using the compile time exception, whereas unchecked ones propagated automatically. We can create checked custom exceptions by extending Java-lang exception class, whereas to create custom exception we need to extend runtime exception. Checked exceptions occur when the change of failure are too high, whereas unchecked exception occurs mostly due to programming mistakes. Checked exceptions can be interrupted exception, illegal argument exception, clone not supported exception, security exception, and null pointer exception. Let's go detail with all of this. Interrupted exception is a checked exception if any thread has interrupted while either before or after running during the activity of waiting, sleeping, or otherwise occupied. Occasionally, a method may wish to test whether the current thread has been interrupted, and if so, to immediately throw this exception. As an example, it can be thrown while interrupted method, and in this case, the method clears the interrupted status. Other methods can be cause interrupted exception are object waits, thread sleep, thread interrupt, and thread interrupted. Illegal argument exception is a checked exception as well, and it's thrown to indicate that a method has been passed an illegal or inappropriate argument. Thread set priority can cause illegal argument exception. Clone not supported exception is a checked exception and thrown if a thread can be meaningfully cloned. Thrown to indicate that the clone method in a class object has been called to clone an object, but that the object class does not implement the clonable interface. Applications that override the clone method can also throw this exception to indicate that an object could not or should not be cloned. In this case, construct an if thread can be considered. Object.clone method can be throw clone not supported exception. Security exception thrown by the security manager to indicate a security violation if an application violates the security rules and cannot continue the execution. Changing a thread name or priority while we don't have access is an example of this situation of security exception. Null pointer exception is a checked exception and thrown when an application attempts to use null in a case where an object is required. These cases include calling the instance method of a null object, accessing or modifying the field of a null object, taking the length of null as if it were an array, accessing or modifying the slots of null as if it were an array, throwing null as if it were a throwable value. Applications should throw instances of class to indicate other illegal uses of the null object. Null pointer exception objects may be constructed by the virtual machine as if suppression were disabled and or the stack trace was not writable. Set name or holds lock methods can cause null pointer exception. Unchecked exception. Unchecked exceptions can be illegal thread state exception, illegal monitor state exception, rejected execution exception, or concurrent modification exception. Illegal thread exception is a unchecked exception and thrown to indicate that a thread is not appropriate state for the requested operation. For example, it can be applicable for thread resume or thread suspend methods. Rejected execution exception is an unchecked exception and thrown by an executor when a task cannot be accepted for execution. It checks if the executor has been previously shut down and increments running test count. Concurrent modification exception. This exception may be thrown by methods that have detected concurrent modification of an object when such modification is not permissible. For example, it is thrown if one thread is trying to modify a collection while another thread is already iterating over it. Fail-fast iterator implementation may throw this exception in this situation. We can define fail-fast iterators they fail quickly and cleanly rather than risking arbitrary non-deterministic behavior at an undetermined time in the future. On the other hand, this exception does not always indicate that an object has been concurrently modified by a different thread. If a single thread issues a sequence of method invocations that violates the contract of an object, this can be ended by throwing this exception. For example, if a thread modifies a collection directly while it is iterating over the collection with a fail-fast iterator, the iterator will throw this exception. Fail-fast behavior cannot be guaranteed to make any hard guarantees in the presence of unsynchronized concurrent modification. Fail-fast operation throw concurrent modification exception on the best effort basis. Therefore, it will be wrong to write a program that relies on this exception to provide thread safety. Concurrent modification exception should be used only to detect bugs. For avoiding concurrent modification exception, first solution could be converting a list to an array and iterating through on the array could be a good approach for small or medium size of list, but it would cause bad performance for large size list. As a second solution, applying locks by putting a synchronized block while iterating the list can be a good approach, but it causes poor performance for large list. Third, using concurrent API like concurrent hash map or copy on write array list provides both effective and scalable solution. This is the most recommended approach to avoid from concurrent modification exception. And other concurrent package exceptions are broken barrier exception thrown when a thread tries to wait upon a barrier that is in a broken state or which enters the broken state while thread is waiting. Cancellation exception indicates that the result of a value producing task such as future task cannot be retrieved because the task was cancelled. Completion exception thrown when an error or other exception is encountered in the course of completing a result or task. Execution exception thrown when attempting to retrieve the result of a task that aborted by throwing an exception. This exception can be inspected using the throwable getCalls method. Rejected execution exception thrown by an executor when a task cannot be accepted for execution. Timeout exception thrown when a blocking operation times out. Blocking operations for which a timeout is specified need a means to indicate that timeout has occurred. For many such operations, it is possible to return a value that indicates timeout. When that is not possible or desirable, when timeout exception should be declared or thrown.